Well, thank you everyone for coming. So my name is Kelsey Collimore, and I'm going to be starting us off tonight. In terms of a little bit more about me, I work in the Mood and Anxiety Disorders program, and I have a particular interest and a lot of training in terms of the treatment of mood, anxiety, and traumatic stress disorders. So with that being said, we'll get started. So the topic tonight is looking at thought, behavior, and social patterns that are commonly associated with depression in adults. And one of the reasons for why we wanted to talk about this topic at a Conversations talk is because we really find that the more people understand these patterns, the better are they able to help other people or support other people or possibly support themselves. So for that reason, that's the main purpose of tonight's presentation. So with that being said, here are our more specific objectives of tonight's presentation. First, we're going to talk a little bit about what depression is, just in terms of setting the context for tonight's talk. Thereafter, we're going to talk about the relationship between depression and behavior, and then talk about the relationship between depression and thinking. Thereafter, Dr. Jacobs is going to be speaking about the relationship between depression and social interaction, or social functioning, or interpersonal relationships. And this part of the presentation is really going to incorporate some of the behavior and thought tendencies that Dr. Todd and I are going to touch upon. One of the reasons for why we wanted to talk about this area in particular is that we know that depression has a very strong interpersonal component in that it can significantly impact people's social relationships on the one hand. But on the other hand, we also know that social support is so important in terms of helping people to manage and overcome their difficulties with low mood. So for those reasons, that's a key area that we wanted to highlight tonight. And then we're also going to talk about just a brief update in terms of efficacy related to psychotherapy. So what is depression? This is a complex question, and I think that with advances in research, we're going to get a better understanding of this over time. So what we'll do is we'll talk about how we understand it right now. So in the media, oftentimes we talk about depression as kind of one difficulty. But actually, as healthcare providers, we actually understand it to be a class or a category of difficulties that are characterized by persistent difficulties with low mood, and or a loss of interest or pleasure in things that people usually enjoy. So right now we conceptualize it, this class or category of difficulties, as depressive disorders. Unlike the common emotion of sadness, which we all can experience, these difficulties are persistent, so persistent sadness, and they can be associated with significant interference related to a person's thinking, behavior, activity, and also their physical health. So we know that there's several types of difficulties, several types of depression. Taking a step back from that, historically, when we've understood mood difficulties, we've understood them in terms of whether or not people have experienced a low period, whether or not people have experienced an elevated or very high or energetic period of mood, or whether or not people have experienced a low period and a high, energetic, or excited mood. Okay, so we categorized it according to those different periods. So if an individual was to experience a period of high or energetic or excited mood, then we would categorize their difficulties within the bipolar spectrum. Okay, so bipolar, two poles, high and low. Okay. If an individual was to have difficulties with only a low period, then we would categorize it as according to, or conceptualize it as a depressive disorder, or what we would call a unipolar depression. So uni, one pole, low. Okay. So the focus of today's presentation is we're going to be focusing on unipolar depression or depressive disorders in general. Within each of these categories, there's various different types of difficulties associated here. So we're not going to get into the specific details regarding the specific types because that's beyond the scope of today's presentation, but we're going to talk about unipolar depression in general and how this impacts thinking and behavior and social patterns. Certainly, there may be people here that are looking to understand difficulties with low mood or may have difficulties with low mood within the context of a bipolar spectrum disorder, or looking to support a loved one who have difficulties in the context of low mood within a bipolar spectrum disorder. This presentation will be relevant for those periods of low within that spectrum. So various types of depression. Just some more background in terms of how we understand depression. So depression can be a reaction to a life experience. So a life transition, the end of an important relationship, for example. For some people, depression can come for no clear reason. Can't identify a particular stressor. And for some people, they experience periods of depression within particular periods of low mood, and those periods can last from 2 weeks to many years. Or for other people, they describe feeling depressed all the time. So it might be more part of their character or more characterological. Okay, so depression can present in a variety of ways based on either the chronicity of symptoms or in terms of their severity, being more mild, moderate, or severe. So it's not only a bad mood. In fact, we know that it can affect a variety of other symptoms. So it can affect how people feel emotionally. Depression can affect people cognitively in terms of their thinking or their thinking processes. Depression can also affect how people feel physically, which we've talked about and we'll talk more about. It can also affect what people do. So let's go through and let's take a look at how this might look. One of the things about difficulties, not only with depression, but in mental health, is that there's a lot of overlap in symptoms. So a lot of these difficulties can present in other difficulties. So sometimes when people are getting new information, they kind of go through the symptoms and they might identify with some. Certainly, these are symptoms that people can have at times, whether they're depressed or whether or not they're depressed. And also they can be characteristic of other difficulties. So just important to keep that in mind. But in terms of depression, so we've talked about how depression emotionally might present as persistent feelings of sadness. So what we mean by that is people might be feeling down for most of the day, nearly every day, for a period of time that might last a period of weeks up to a period of 7 years. It can be characterized by a loss of interest or pleasure in activities that people usually enjoy. It can also be characterized by a feeling of emptiness, or sometimes people describe feeling numb or feeling flat. For some people, anxiety or anxious distress is also a part of difficulties with low mood, or they might feel irritable. And also for some people, they may have strong feelings of guilt as part of their difficulties with depression. In terms of cognitive symptoms, which Dr. Todd is going to be talking more about as one of our patterns, one of our thinking patterns as related to depression, we know that depression can have a strong impact in terms of the content of people's thinking, but also the process of people's thinking. So in terms of thought content, or what people are thinking about, people may have thoughts of hopelessness or thoughts of helplessness, helplessness related to not being able to manage their mood difficulties. They don't know how to help themselves. It could be thoughts related to hopelessness. Because they don't know how to help themselves, they start to feel less hopeful for the future. They don't know what the future will hold. For some people, they may have negative thoughts, or they start to feel negatively about themselves. And for some people, this can present as feeling as bad as worthless, or just generally having low self-esteem. And also for some people, the emotional distress and with difficulties with respect to their circumstances or with respect to their inability or difficulty with coping with their symptoms can lead them to have thoughts related to harming themselves, or thinking a lot about death, or thinking about dying, or thinking that they might be better off dead, or thinking about dying by suicide. In terms of thought process, moving on to that, we know that depression can be characterized by difficulties related to repetitive negative thinking. And this can be related to repetitive negative thinking about things that might happen in the future, so worrying about things that might happen in the future. Or it might be repetitive negative thinking about things that have happened to them in the past, which we would call rumination. This might be a negative experience that people have had, such as a loss. They may find that they're continually thinking about what happened, why that happened, what that means for their future, for example. In addition, people may also have difficulties with respect to concentration, or they might have difficulties making decisions, everyday decisions possibly, or greater life decisions. And for some people, they find that they may just have a generally pessimistic outlook as a result of difficulties with depression. Physically, individuals who have difficulties with depression may feel tired all of the time, a lack of energy. It can also result in changes related to appetite and related to sleep, so possibly not having an appetite and having to force themselves to eat, or eating too much. So again, different people can present with different symptoms even within the same difficulty. Individuals with depression can also have significant difficulties with sleep. This is an emerging area of research, so we're starting to learn a lot more about the relationship between depression and sleep, and I think we'll learn a lot more about this with advancements in research. But in terms of how that might look when people are depressed is that people may have difficulties falling asleep, they may have difficulties staying asleep, or they may have difficulties where they're waking up earlier than they usually would. Or for some people, they may find that their sleep schedule is off. So they might find that they're sleeping more throughout the day, but then during the night, they have difficulty falling asleep and they're up all night. And so their schedule is off. For some individuals who have difficulties with depression, they have more aches and pains. Some people may feel more keyed up or agitated or on edge or restless. Whereas other people may feel more slowed down, like they're talking or moving more slowly than was usual for them. And oftentimes that agitation or that feeling slowed down, being slowed down, is observable by people around them. Another thing that people don't often commonly realize is that depression can be associated with a decreased sexual desire, a decreased libido. So this can happen for a number of reasons. Either it could be a decreased sex drive, or it could be that people are not interested, right? So coming back to what we talked about at the beginning, we talked about how depression is characterized by a loss of interest or pleasure in things that people usually enjoy. That could include sexual activity. In terms of how depression might look in terms of behaviors, an individual who has difficulties with depression may find that they're withdrawing more from other people or relationships, or that they have difficulty getting along with other people because they're feeling irritable. Because individuals are sad, they may find that they're crying more often or more frequently than they normally would, or having difficulty managing their emotions related to crying. Individuals may find, as you mentioned, in terms of a behavior, sleeping more during the day, spending more time on the couch, spending more time in their room or on their bed lying down. They may also find that they're isolating more from other people. Individuals may also find that they stop doing activities, stop going out socially with other people, for example, or they might procrastinate on activities in terms of taking a lot of time to get things done, things that maybe that are on their to-do list. For some individuals, in terms of their behavior, they may have a lot of difficulty related to personal hygiene. So have difficulty getting up, have difficulty taking a shower, have difficulty washing their face, have difficulty brushing their teeth, for example. In general, and we'll talk more about this, individuals with depression might escape from situations or conversations or circumstances that are distressing or that they don't want to deal with in terms of escaping from particular situations. Or they might also avoid situations that they don't necessarily want to cope with. And we've talked about how depression can be associated with thoughts of suicide in terms of behaviors for some people. This can result in actually taking steps towards harming themselves, or in some cases, dying by suicide. So what causes depression? This is another complex question, and actually this is something that people ask a lot, always wanting to know what is the cause of depression, or what is the cause of my depression, for example. We don't know is the short answer to that question. But what we do know, and I think this is an area that we'll learn more about, in the media, there's a lot of different views as to what the cause of depression is. And really that's what we know, that different people have different views or different theories related to this. The most common view, or what we know, is that it's not only caused by one factor. So the most prominent view or prevailing view is what we would call the biopsychosocial model. And what that means is that we understand that the reason for why people may develop difficulties with depression may be related to multiple factors, including factors related to their biology, which may include heritability. It may include psychological factors such as thinking patterns or behavior patterns. Or it may be due to environmental factors or social factors related to stressful or negative life experiences. And so we understand depression developing right now, kind of the prevailing view, as a result of a combination of these factors. And this combination can be different for different people. So there seems to be more conversation about mental health and depression in the media, and certainly there's been more recognition regarding the impact of depression both globally and at a national level. According to a prediction by the World Health Organization, they predicted that depression will be the second leading cause of disability worldwide by the year 2020 after heart disease. So a very significant challenge that we're facing both at a global level and at a national level. For here in Canada, our most recent data from Stats Canada, from our community health survey, mental health survey, so this is from 2012, showed that approximately 13% of Canadians reported a depressive disorder in their lifetime. So this was 3.5 million Canadians reporting difficulties with a depressive or unipolar depression over the course of their life. So really affecting a great number of Canadians. And when they looked at prevalence within the past year, so past 12 months, it was 5.4% of Canadians. In terms of how that might look, so not only looking at the numbers, but we really know that depression not only affects an individual, but it affects their greater social network, and it can affect the societal level as well. So we certainly know that depression can cause significant personal and family suffering. We also know that there can be a societal impact as a result of depression, wherein individuals may have difficulty as a result of the depression in terms of their roles or fulfilling their roles, whether that be their familial roles or whether that be roles related to their employment. We also know that individuals who have difficulties with depression have access a great amount of services in terms of increased healthcare utilization. And this also has a financial or economic cost. We also know that depression is associated with a high level of lost productivity related to both absenteeism and presenteeism. So absenteeism being that people are missing work or are not attending work because of their difficulties with depression, or presenteeism meaning that people are going to work, but they're having difficulty fulfilling their job requirements or having interference at work because of their difficulties with depression. And recent data is showing that presenteeism is in fact a very big problem related to difficulties with depression. We also know that depression is associated, can have significant impacts in terms of people's physical health. So in terms of associations with physical health conditions when we look at data over the long term. So we've talked about that the various symptoms that manifest when people have difficulties with depression. So we know that there are several types of depression, and we know that depression affects not only how people feel in terms of their emotions, but we know that it also affects people's thinking. It affects how people feel physically, and it also affects their behaviors. What's less commonly discussed is that we know that there's actually a relationship between these symptoms. And so one of the things that when we see individuals who have difficulties with depression, we talk about this. One of the first things that we talk about how we know that depression doesn't only affect mood, but that it's made up of a variety of components in terms of thinking, physical sensations, and behavior. And we know that all of these symptoms can interact and influence each other. So how might this look for an individual who has difficulties with depression? So for example, for an individual who's sad or depressed, in terms of how this might affect them physically, they might feel tired, they might have less energy. In terms of how this might affect their behaviors, they may spend more time sleeping, or withdraw, or stop taking care of themselves. And this can also affect their thinking, or in terms of their thoughts. It can affect them in that they notice that they are feeling more negatively about themselves, or about other people, or the future, or their circumstance. And so one of the things that we know is that when we speak with individuals, so we know that mood has a significant impact on thoughts, physical symptoms, and behaviors. But also what we know from the research and from people's experiences is that they indicate that when these changes in thinking and when these changes in behaviors start to occur, that then there's like a negative feedback loop back onto their mood. So as people start to have more negative thoughts about themselves, their mood starts to be even worse. And as people start to stop engaging in activities that they usually enjoy or staying home more, that they also notice that there's a negative feedback loop onto their mood. And so unintentionally, people may find that over time, when their symptoms of sadness persist, that they may find themselves kind of trapped in this depression cycle, which is associated with these thinking patterns and with these behavior patterns. So we'll come back to that model because really that's the framework for understanding these various patterns that we're going to be talking about tonight. So let's talk a little bit more about this relationship between depression and behavior. So one of the things that we know is that depression or our mood has a very significant impact in terms of our behavior. This is true for individuals who have difficulties with depression, and this is also true for individuals who don't have difficulties with depression. So for example, if we're feeling angry in terms of our mood, it may have the impact on our behavior that we might yell. If we're feeling anxious about a particular situation, such as giving a presentation, for example, it might affect our behavior in that we might say, I'm not giving that presentation. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to engage in that situation, okay? So in general, there's a very strong relationship between our mood and behavior. The problem when people have difficulties with depression is that their sadness or their loss of interest is persistent, and it's persistent over time. And so these types of behaviors can become more of a habit and can become more of a problem as they repeat itself over time. So in terms of how this might look, for an individual who's experiencing persistent difficulties with sadness, or they're not interested in doing things as a result of their difficulties with depression. They may have no motivation. They may have no energy. As a result of that, they may remain in bed. They may take a nap. They may withdraw from social activity. They might isolate from other people. They may neglect their personal hygiene, as I said, or they may just generally do less. Okay. And one of the challenges of that is that what many people indicate and what we know is that when there are these changes in behavior, it can actually lead people to have even more negative feelings associated with that. So people may start to feel guilty for not having done particular activities, or not having engaged socially, or not maintaining relationships, or not completing tasks. Or people may start to feel hopeless that they were unable to do those things, and wondering about how they might be able to break out of this cycle. And then, as a result of that, they feel more sad, and they have even less of an interest. And so then the cycle can continue, and people find that they may be trapped in this cycle related to mood and behavior. So in terms of depression and behavior, we see that there's generally an increase in certain types of behaviors, and then there's a decrease in other types of behaviors when people are depressed. In terms of behaviors that people engage in less, individuals who have difficulties with depression generally approach or engage in life less. So they may be less likely to interact with other people. They may be less likely to go out and meet new people. They may be less likely to try out new activities, for example. On the other hand, there's an increase in behaviors related to escaping from situations, or withdrawing from situations or other people, or avoiding situations. So for example, declining social invitations, or staying at home, for example. One of the things that we wanted to be really, really clear about is that many of the behaviors that people use to cope with depression make an individual feel better in the short term. This makes sense. It's natural to cope by withdrawing and disengaging when you're feeling sad or when you're not finding pleasure in activities. Okay? The challenge is when people feel sad all of the time, or they're not interested all of the time. In the long run, these behaviors, they're not helpful, and they can unintentionally make people's depression worse. So one of the things that when people have difficulties with depression, they often talk about how their mood might dictate what they do, right? They're talking about this connection between mood and behavior. And so we'll generally hear things such as, I didn't feel like it, right? So again, engaging in activity when they feel like it, or not engaging in activity when they don't feel like it. And again, when people don't have difficulties with depression, we do that too, right? But again, that becomes problematic when people don't feel like it all of the time. So one of the things that we know is that when people with depression start to choose what they do based on how they're feeling, that this can actually lead to them avoiding or rejecting activities that may actually help with improving their mood. This is a real challenge. That connection between mood and behavior is a very strong relationship. So this is one of the key things that we help people to work on. But we know from our research that with effort and over time, activity or making changes in behavior can improve people's mood. And we also know that it also can increase people's motivation to engage in more activity. So coming back to our model that we talked about when we first started talking about this mood behavior pattern, if an individual is sad, isn't interested in activities that they usually enjoy, again, no energy or motivation. If an individual can try to make a change in their behavior in terms of getting out of bed, it doesn't have to be a big change. Getting out of bed, showering, going for a walk, or phoning a friend. Or for some people, these are big changes. It really depends on the individual person. They may find that as they try to break out of this cycle, they may find that as they make some changes in their behavior, that they may have more energy or that it might improve their mood. Or for some people, what they say is, okay, well, it didn't necessarily improve my mood, but for some people, it doesn't make their mood worse. Okay, so it's kind of a first step related to breaking out of this cycle. So the important thing to know about this mood-behavior connection is that mood has a significant impact in terms of what we do, in terms of people's behavior, but that's a bidirectional relationship in terms of what we know, that our behavior can have a significant impact in terms of how we feel and in terms of our mood.
Okay, so now we're going to turn our attention towards the way that thoughts impact our mood and vice versa, the way that our mood can impact how we think. So the way that we currently understand depression was actually informed quite a bit by the reports of depressed clients themselves, who talked a lot about kind of this constant running commentary of thoughts that were very heavily weighted by negative thinking. And those reports of the clients themselves helped us not only to develop our theories of how we understand depression, but also the treatments that we offer. So we're going to walk through a bit of an example of how thoughts can impact mood. And so I want you to first kind of imagine that it's your first day at a new job, and it's an important job for you. And you've just gone through a whole morning of training, and you're about to try this new task for the first time. And your boss is standing beside you, and you try it out, and you make a mistake. Imagine, what are the first thoughts that run through your mind? Are they self-compassionate thoughts? Are they self-critical thoughts? So let's say I had the thought that, oh, this is such a simple task. I can't believe I screwed it up. Why can't I get this right? How is that likely to make me feel? I may feel discouraged. I may feel anxious. I might feel sad. And then once I start feeling kind of crummy like that, that might lead me to have more negative thoughts. Like, God, I can never get these things right, no matter how hard I try. Maybe I'll never get anything right. And if I start thinking that way, how likely am I to kind of keep going and persist and try again? Maybe those kinds of thoughts make me more likely to give up, or maybe even quit that job. And then how's that going to feed back into the way that I think about myself in the first place? If I quit and give up, does that give me any reason to believe that I'll do well in the future? So in this way, our thinking impacts our mood quite a bit, and our mood can impact our thoughts. So we know that thoughts impact mood. And we also know that we're almost always thinking. All of us, we all have this kind of constant internal dialogue going in the background at almost all times. We're always thinking about and interpreting the situations that we encounter in our environment and what we're doing. So think about even all of the thoughts that you might have had just getting from wherever you were before this to coming here tonight. So there's the kind of traffic that I usually encounter on the Queensway. You might have had thoughts about, am I going to make it on time for 7 o'clock? What if I'm late? If another driver cut you off, you might be thinking something about that driver. you might be thinking, I wonder if this is going to be a boring presentation or an interesting presentation, if it's going to be useful to me, will I get anything out of this? Am I going to see anybody I know here? So we're kind of always doing this, all of us. A lot of the time we don't even notice ourselves doing this, and thank goodness, because if we paid attention to every thought that we had, it would be really overwhelming. And a lot of what we're thinking is really benign, so it doesn't do us much harm, and a lot of it is actually quite useful because it's really good for us to be able to think about our environment and interpret the situations that we're in, because it helps us make decisions and motivate our actions. And there's really nothing all that different about people who experience depression and people don't, in the sense of whether there is an internal dialogue happening. But with people who have depression, it's the content of the internal dialogue that differs quite a bit. So people with depression have an internal dialogue that has far fewer positive thoughts and many more negative thoughts. And it's kind of human nature, all of us, tend to treat our thoughts as facts. So all of this little running commentary that we have all the time, we're not stopping to consider whether we're right or wrong. We kind of just take our thoughts for granted and we act on them. And so if we have an internal dialogue that's really heavily weighted with negative thoughts, then we may tend to start believing those thoughts. And it's also quite comfortable to think that we're right, even when the thoughts that we're having are negative. And we can start to look for things that confirm the way that we think. So we kind of pay selective attention to things that go along with the way that we think and kind of discount the things that don't. So if I'm on the first day at my job and I'm in a customer service business, I might be noticing all of the customers that seem to be really annoyed and grumpy with me because I've made this mistake. And that's going to kind of reinforce the way that I think. And we know that or sometimes we try and explain our feelings to others with reference to the situation that preceded them. So if I'm explaining to somebody that I'm really upset, and they say, why? I might say, I'm feeling really upset because I was expecting a phone call from a friend and she didn't call when she said that she would. That's with reference to a situation. So what happened? So I'm kind of accounting for the way that I feel with reference to something that occurred. But we know it's actually far more important the meaning that we make of a situation rather than the situation itself. So in other words, what's making me feel really upset is probably not just that my friend didn't call when she said that she would. Maybe I'm really upset because I think that must mean that I'm not important to her, or that she thinks that I'm boring. She really doesn't want to make contact with me. And that might make me feel quite different than if I thought maybe she's running late, or maybe she needed to take care of something with her child. Probably have a very different feeling. And then once a feeling is present like that, again, we're more likely to have further negative thoughts. So maybe I start to think, I knew when she got to know me well enough, she'd not want to continue to hang around me, just like other people. You know, this always happens. And so a lot of times when people come in for help with depression, the primary goal is, I really want to change the way that I feel. And that makes sense. I want to feel sad less often. But it can be really helpful if we know that thoughts have such an important impact on our mood, to consider starting to look at and kind of notice the way that we're thinking, and to shift those patterns of thought to change how we feel. That can be one of a few really good places to start when we're looking to improve our mood or change how we feel over time. So since we have known about the impact of thinking on mood, we've started to kind of pay a lot of attention to the kinds of thoughts that people have when they're feeling depressed. And we know that depression sort of creates this trifecta of thinking where we're more likely to have negative thoughts about ourselves, negative thoughts about other people, and negative thoughts about kind of life or the future in general. So that might mean, if it's about myself, it might mean I think I'm kind of an incompetent person, or an unlovable or unlikable person. With respect to the way that we think about other people, maybe we fear that other people can't be trusted, or that they'll take advantage of us. And when we're thinking about our future, maybe we're fearing that we can't really count on anything good happening, that bad things always seem to happen to me. And those thoughts are really powerful. Another thing that tends to happen is something that we call hopelessness. And by that, we're referring to explaining negative events in a way that are internal, stable, and global. So internal in the sense that if I made this mistake on the first day at my job, that's because it's something to do with me. There's something wrong with me. I can't learn stuff well. As opposed to thinking that it's something to do with the circumstances, maybe my training, or shared responsibility with other people. Stable in the sense that this is not likely to change, right? I always do this. I can never learn anything. And global in the sense that if I make a mistake at this, maybe I can never do any job. Maybe this is an indication that things like this will always happen. And that's quite different than the way that we make attributions maybe about other people. So when we're not depressed, we might have more of a tendency to think about other reasons for negative events, maybe external causes, right? Wow, I just haven't had enough training yet. Or sometimes we blame it on other people. Maybe it's somebody else's fault, and that's maybe not very accurate, but it doesn't make us feel down about ourselves. So there's a bit of a difference in the way that we attribute negative events when we're depressed. And the last one here, as Dr. Collimore said before, is less about the content of what we think when we're depressed, but more about the way that we think when we're depressed. So I think rumination is a really good word. And it really literally means kind of revisiting negative events and kind of mentally chewing on them after they've already happened. So if I go home from the first day on my job and I'm sitting at the table with my spouse and he's trying to have a conversation with me, I might be distracted and not able to pay attention to the conversation because I'm too busy kind of mentally reviewing that mistake that I made, thinking about it over and over again. And then I go and try and watch a movie and I can't really pay attention to what I'm watching because I'm ruminating again. And the thing about that is that rumination tends to kind of keep alive a negative mood long past when it otherwise would have subsided on its own. So it has the effect of kind of kindling that negative mood and keeping it going, which doesn't do us any favors in the long run. So I won't go through all of these, but when we work with clients who are depressed, we do ask them to try to start to notice the little biases that they have in the way that they're thinking. And these are kind of examples of the types of thoughts that people can have when they're having thoughts about themselves or other people or their future. And I want you to just kind of think about whether you can recognize any of those types of thoughts yourself. And I think that probably these are universal. All of us probably can. If I look down this list, I can see the types of thoughts that I sometimes have. But as we've been emphasizing throughout the presentation, it's not whether we have these thoughts, it's how often they happen and how severe they are. So if we go back to our example, let's say we try and shift our thinking a little bit. So the same situation. And remember, it's not the situation that causes a negative mood, it's sometimes the meaning that we make of it. So I make the same mistake on the first day at my new job. But instead of thinking, I'll never get this right, I think, wow, this is really tough. It's going to take me a while to get the hang of this. Am I going to feel discouraged or sad or anxious? Probably not. Probably if I acknowledge that this will take me a while to get used to, I might just feel maybe slightly embarrassed that I made a mistake in front of my boss, but otherwise pretty neutral. And I might I might try again because my thoughts aren't going to keep escalating. I won't be focused on, is there something wrong with me? I might just be focused on the task at hand and kind of get back in and try again. And if I try again and I succeed, will that reinforce these kind of negative thoughts I have about myself? Probably not. So that's kind of a little illustration of the power of our thoughts. And we don't often stop and think about how powerful our brains are, but they really are. And so Dr. Jacobs will talk a little bit later about the way that we harness the power of our thoughts when we're doing treatments for depression.
Okay, again, thank you so much for coming. Like others have said, this is a fantastic turnout, so it's so good to see the interest and the active role people are willing to play in their own treatment and in that of other people. So what I'm going to talk about now is not another part of that cycle that Dr. Collimore and Dr. Todd touched on. It's more taking all of those pieces and looking at how they create other cycles. It's specifically looking at a certain type of behavior that's driven by a certain type of thought that then influences our relationships with others. So far we've been looking, at how do the thoughts and behaviors work in one person. And now we want to look at how does it actually affect the environment around them? And this isn't common language, but some theorists and developers of treatments for depression actually refer to depressed environments or depressed homes or depressed relationships. So taking away this idea that depression is a label to just slap on a person and more realize that it's something that can describe cycles that extend far outside of one individual. I do want to stress at the beginning that a lot of these can be so these are 4 main ones that come out in the research and in treatment. A lot of these can be kind of hard to understand and even a little hard to hear at times. And I think it's important to stress that just like the thinking patterns and the behaviors that we've been describing aren't the fault of someone with depression, they're a symptom. Same for this. This is not to blame. This is not to say that a person is behaving in a certain way with other people and they need to stop because they're just making that choice. No, it's saying this is what manifests over time. And I also think anytime I've talked about this, this is like the squirmiest part of the talk because just like with the thoughts and the behaviors, you will see yourselves in these. These are not unique to people with depression. I am a consummate professional at several of these skills, so you can find a lot of these in yourselves. So when your eyes all go down, I know what's happening. The first pattern that we look at is interpersonal conflict avoidance. And honestly, like at first glance, that sounds like a good thing. Like, okay, the person doesn't want to fight. And that is good. But what this means more is that a person with depression, because of their avoidance behaviors and because of their negative beliefs about themselves and their abilities, believe that they're not going to be able to actually navigate an exchange with someone else where there might be a bit of a conflict. And it doesn't mean a fight, it just means like, I want to go to this restaurant, you want to go to this one. And it does manifest in what we often think of as low assertiveness, and that's a very common area to work on both for people with depression and for many other difficulties and with no diagnosed difficulty. As you can imagine from this, though, the more you avoid these potential conflicts, you actually start to lose things. So if you keep backing down all the time and you keep saying, okay, I'm not going to argue, eventually some people might just start to leave because you're not standing up for yourself. It may become a very one-sided relationship. You can also lose roles. And what I mean by losing a role is it can be an official role, like a job or a spouse, or it can be kind of like, I used to be the one who was the life of the party, or I used to be the one who kept track of our checkbook. But because you're not willing anymore, again, to stand up to the other people who might be vying for that role, and I don't mean fighting, just negotiating, you start to lose that, and you start to lose your sense of who you are and your sense of meaning. And that is another kind of hallmark of depression. It also causes more direct losses in a social sense. So we will, if we're avoiding people, we have less social contact. And that lowers, we do stay away from the negative, unpleasant parts of interacting with people, but we also lose all the positive ones. And over time, people, they'll call and call and call, but except for a few, those calls might start to drop off. So we actually lose the support system that we need probably more than ever. The next one is excessive reassurance-seeking. And this actually was the original interpersonal pattern that was researched the most looking at depression in the 70s. And there's an entire theory of depression that's just based on this. So something that seems kind of as like a side dish in a theory actually is a very powerful way of viewing depression. The idea is that when we have depression, again, we start from a place of doubting ourselves, doubting our abilities, doubting our desirability to other people, doubting the strength of our relationships with others. So we'll ask people like, do you still like me? Do you love me? Am I doing a good job? Is the presentation good? Like that sort of thing. But what happens then is the person with depression is going to say like, well, that's not fitting, and we'll get to this a little more in a second, but that's not fitting with what I think, and I don't really believe you because you're giving me information that I just can't accept. So we ask again. And it kind of ricochets back and forth between our doubts about ourselves and the reassurance. What happens, though, is that after a while, and this is sometimes one of the harder parts to acknowledge, excessively seeking reassurance can become really wearing on other people. And again, that's not to blame anyone who's experiencing depression, but it is something that happens. And with the best of intentions, many times other people will start to pull back. Kind of like, I've told you I care about you, I've told you I love you, told you the presentation's good, but this is just getting very tiring, and they start to withdraw. Interestingly, from at least a good portion of research, neither party knows it's happening. It's not just the people withdrawing who know. Sometimes it's unconscious for both parts. And then, unfortunately, the fact that they're gone completely confirms the initial thing that started it in the first place. My phone isn't ringing anymore. I don't have strong relationships. Things are worse than I even thought. And we get caught in an incredibly vicious cycle. So you can see how something that seems a little, kind of just trivial actually can mushroom into a really big problem. The third one, this one to me, it makes the least sense at first because it's very counterintuitive, but it's negative feedback seeking. It would be to think like, well, nobody, depressed or not, is looking to hear bad things about themselves. At least to me, that seems like what might be the common sense answer. But actually, in a sort of roundabout way, when we are depressed, we are. And the reason is that we have a very strong need, no matter what we think of ourselves, to find feedback that's consistent with that view. Because if it's not consistent with our own view of who we are, it's very uncomfortable. It doesn't make sense. It's too much thought. And you can think like, even if you've just tried becoming a morning person instead of a night person or something like that, these changes just are a lot to handle. So a lot of times, a person with depression will ask, what do you think of this? But the question that's actually behind this is, what's wrong with this? Tell me what's wrong. I'm assuming it's bad, so tell me what's wrong. And what happens then, because of that bias toward things that confirm what we already think of ourselves, is you end up in a lose-lose situation. So I can't do things right and I'm stupid. Those would be some beliefs that someone other than me would have during during a sort of low mood experience, leading to ask, what do you think of the presentation? You can tell this is a big issue for me. So then if you say terrible, and if I have that mindset, that set of beliefs, I'm just gonna be like, well, right. I mean, that's absolutely what I thought. You said terrible, it fits with what I thought, we're good. And I use it to strengthen my belief. There's no, pay $200, stop in jail. It just goes right through into strengthening our already unhelpful beliefs. If you tell me it's great, no, we've got to stop and think about this a second, because people like me don't do great things if I'm a depressed individual. And I'm not saying that, but that's the belief that we might have. So we repackage it to make sense of it. They wouldn't tell me it's great, because that's not possible. They're telling me it's great because they feel bad for me. They know how sensitive I am if they criticize it. They're hoping if they say it's good, they'll just I'll leave them alone. So we repackage it until we can still fit it back into that old belief system. So it's vicious because both ways strengthen the initial negative belief. And the fourth really well-researched and really significant interpersonal pattern, it's often called, if you ever are looking this up to read about it, it's called self-handicapping. I use the word self-obstructing. I find it a little more palatable. But it's basically the process of trying to jump the gun before other people have a chance to get disappointed in us, to lower their expectations. So we might start by, again, starting from our own low self-view, try to bring other people's expectations more in line, or not as commonly, but still often, we might actually do things that will give another explanation for the bad job. So if this presentation is going poorly and I procrastinate, then I can tell you I just didn't have time to do a good job. So in that small way, and again, it's not always a conscious thing we're doing, but we're able to say, probably could have been better if I had had more time to whoever's judging us, but don't expect too much because I really rushed this. They do relieve some pressure from us. They do maintain whatever small bits of self-esteem that person might be holding on to. And they do not work very well, but they try to get rid of some of that feeling of guilt as well. But again, in turn, it's a vicious cycle. So they lead to a lot of missed opportunities. And once again, they confirm that poor self-image, those thoughts, those behavioral patterns that we've talked about before. So the pattern here is quite simple, but we start again, low self-esteem, low self-confidence, low self-image, low beliefs about our ability, not actual low ability, but low beliefs about our abilities, and we self-obstruct. We send out the message right away so that the expectations come down, either through our actions or through our words. And hopefully, not hopefully, but what we're hoping when we're in this mindset is that we will actually bring down the expectations, which then confirm what we think. We've lowered the expectations. The other people think, okay, they're not as capable as I thought they are. We either verbally or non-verbally get that feedback. And once again, we're on our way down in a really vicious cycle. The thing for this is everywhere, like the other things. And so again, it's not a matter of people who are suffering from depression do this and people who aren't don't. It's a matter of degree, frequency, severity, and the impact. So some examples, like this isn't really my strong area. It's been so long since I've done this. I've been a bit tired. I've been a bit under the weather. I had to rush to finish it. Or I tend to be a bit shy or quiet or awkward at first. Like, I think everyone in this room keeps one of these very close by in their purse or wallet at all times in case you're not quite ready to do something. I certainly have an assortment. But in essence, we're saying keep your bar low. Don't expect too much of me. And then again, that feeds back and confirms the initial low beliefs that we had. So just to kind of return back to our summary, again, as Dr. Collimore, Dr. Todd, and then stepping back myself have shown, all of these things feed into each other. And I think at first, if we think of depression as like, okay, I thought it was one thing, it's actually at least 4 or 5. That can be very daunting. But the key thing here, and I think it's cause for great hope, is that it's a cycle. And in order to fix an unhelpful cycle, you don't need to break the whole wheel. You just need to cut it at one point. So the great news is we have treatments that are very well tested and evaluated that break that cycle. And again, they don't have to break all 4 points. We can just hit one and start to make that reversal. The treatments with the most empirical or research-based support that we have, one is just behavior therapy, so just working with that behavior part. That's most often a treatment called behavioral activation. We also have the more standard cognitive behavioral therapy, and that cognitive is looking at the thinking patterns, and behavioral is looking at, again, the behaviors. A lot of times why CBT is so common is because those are very synergistic. They work very well together. We also have interpersonal psychotherapy, which is not directly based on those domains I went through, but again, it looks more at the interpersonal relationships and how do we need to alter those in a way that might help someone out of a depression or out of a prolonged difficulty of that sort. And also for the mood and the physical experiences, that's where we don't have it listed explicitly here, but that's where medication can come in. We can't, to the best of our knowledge, directly change physical sensations for depression or depressed mood directly with therapy. We come at it through thoughts, behaviors, social patterns. But that's where medication, and for many people, that combination can be the best. So what we know from the evidence is that for most depressions, psychotherapy or medication are roughly equal. There's not a clear winner. We don't know if that's ever going to change, but right now, and it's a good thing to me because it means we still have a huge other domain of options to try if we feel burnt out on one. When a person has ongoing depression or a depression that has not responded much to treatment, then that's where it's probably a smart idea to be combining the two and raising your odds of a good outcome. I'm not going to read through all of these because these are older glasses, but this is a lot of our community partners. So we do offer a lot of services here at the Royal for depressive disorders, but we want to remind you also that we're not the only shop in town. We work very closely with all of these agencies, programs, and services to deliver really a comprehensive mix. So there are some that are covered by OHIP at the top. There are many great resources in the community that are not directly funded perhaps by OHIP, but through various means are available at usually no cost. There are some that also have a minimal cost, and they use what's called a sliding scale. If you've not heard that term before, it usually means that you bring in some proof of what your income is, and the fee is adjusted based on that. And then there's also the option for private practitioners, and unfortunately, those are not typically covered by OHIP. I should say psychologists or social workers or other psychotherapists. Psychiatrists would be. But many do have sliding scales or people in training or other ways to make those services more accessible as well. So I'm going to leave this up. That concludes our main part. So now we're going to turn it over to you and answer some of the questions you might have.